Hello, welcome to Tiski Sawa. Pleasure to join you this evening. We're all very excited. It's the biggest weekend of the left calendar coming up from Saturday, I think. The left zone Ibiza, but in Liverpool. It's going to be beautiful. To find out what's going to go on, I could not be joined by a better guest than Lara McNeill, youth rep on the NEC. No one is more in the know about what is going to go down in Liverpool than you, is what I heard. That's what I've been told. Is that fair? Yeah.
Well, yeah, maybe. Go on. Ask me questions and then we'll see.
We'll see. Proof's in the pudding. Aaron Bastani.
How you doing?
Senior editor at Novara Media, co-founder.
Oh my God.
You built this house, Aaron.
Show me some respect.
How's it going?
Yeah, it's good actually. It's good. How are you? You good?
Yeah, no, I'm very well.
Good?
Yeah.
Lara, the insider McNeill.
The insider, yeah.
The new establishment.
My establishment now? Oh,
well,
no.
according to like Progress.
Yeah, that's the Progress
when he's
line
eating lunch
yeah.
with Lord Sainsbury at the Savoy, he's going, of course, the new establishment, which is this medical undergraduate student.
It misunderstands what the establishment... Because I was speaking to some Progress lot and they were calling us the new establishment in Novara Media. I was saying, like, you've misunderstood what the establishment means. The establishment doesn't mean you're winning. The establishment means that you have privileged sort of access because of money, because of connections, but not because of popular support. Our wing of the party has popular support. Their wing of the party has connections and money. That's why they're on Sky News all the time. We're on Sky News because
I think
people love
you're on
left-wing
Sky News
politics.
all the time.
No, but that's
I think
because,
we're on Sky News more than they are.
no, but that's because people love left-wing politics, whereas they've got the phone book.
I think we're definitely on Sky News like a lot more than Progress
Yeah,
are.
you're on speed
Richard
dial,
Angel
man.
is on all the time, I swear.
That is true.
Anyway, tonight we're gonna talk a bit about Labour Party conference. That's the main event. Then we're gonna talk about Sadiq Khan's call for a second referendum, whether Twitter ruined politics, and the Lib Dem's turn to authoritarian liberalism. Pretty surreal events going down in... Where's their conference? Does
Who
anyone
cares?
know? Does anyone know?
Have you seen the clip where, like, in Brighton, I think it was last year, where there's, like, the massive Liberal Democrat sign, and then the interviewer's like, do you know which political party is having their conference here? And all the people are like, no. And then they were like, oh, that one. And they're like, do you know who they are? And they're like, no. It's really good.
Where is it this year?
I don't know. I think they always do it at Seaside Town, but I've got no idea which one it is. If anyone knows where it is, put it in the comments
I mean, I'm
section.
from Bournemouth and like nobody's mentioned it to me.
It could be in Bournemouth. Who knows? Anyway, Lara. It's Labour Party conference in just under 7 days. Will the crowd say Reselection, or will momentum be walking away empty-handed? Can you fill me in?
Oh,
Come on!
We need a moment of silence for that. That was amazing.
was good.
I'm really excited for conference. It's going to be great. To be fair, I don't think it's just Momentum who are supporting Reselection or calls for Reselection. I think it's a very popular demand from people, whether they align with a faction, whether they don't, whether they're trade union delegates, whether they're affiliate delegates. I think it's been a long time coming. I think there were some polls out saying that a lot of delegates from CLP support Reselection. So I'm really hoping it will be voted on and pass, yeah.
All right, so we can get up, in terms of that delegate story, we can get up that story from The Guardian. So Momentum, they polled their
1,100 people.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed. That's like more than
Huge.
YouGov, isn't it? That must have just been people in Momentum's office. Well, I suppose they've got a big network of people
But
in
it's
CLPs.
also from across 450 CLPs, so it's a good spread.
That's a good sign.
So it's going to be very representative.
Well, so that what that means is that on the conference floor there'll be lots of support for mandatory reselection or something that looks like it. Open selections. The idea is that people will be able to stand against incumbent MPs before a trigger ballot has got rid of them. But the fact that delegates from constituencies want it to pass doesn't necessarily mean it will. Obviously, at conference, 50% of the votes come from union delegates and 50% of the votes come from CLP delegates. So unless any of the big unions decide to back something that looks like mandatory reselection or open selections, whatever we want to call it, it might not pass. So where do you see the balance of power falling, or what do you think there'll be a majority for at Labour Party conference when it comes to the selection of MPs?
Well, you've got unions like Unite who have passed it at their policy conference. They want, reform to the trigger ballot system. I think in general, as a trade unionist, I think that it is important that we have mandatory reselection because it means that we can get more working class people in Parliament, essentially, and someone who's, essentially being in there and being a middle class person is there in a safe seat for life now. And I think that it will be in trade unionist interest to have that. Whether the unions actually have that policy is a different matter. I think it's important that the unions make up the NEC and conference because they founded our party, so that's really important. And I think it's up to trade unionists themselves to persuade, their unions and delegates to vote that way. In terms of predicting the outcome of conference, I'm not sure, but we'll see soon enough.
Aaron, what do you think?
I love outlandish bets. I love impossible sort of prospects. But, I mean, if you were a betting person, clearly change is on the cards, right? It's coming. The question is, what's the extent? How much is going to change? Is it going to be what's being referred to as open selection, reselection, or is it going to be something else?
Yeah.
Are we going to see a compromise?
So let's talk about let's clarify the options. So at the moment, to get rid of your MP, members have to win a trigger ballot, and the trigger ballot at the moment is pretty complicated because you have to have a majority of either wards, which is where the members hang out, or affiliated organisations. They have to vote to trigger a selection process that has some sort of dysfunctional elements to it because a ward which is made up of 500 or 1,000 members has the same vote as an affiliated union which might have 6 members. And so what we've seen in a bunch of London boroughs is that GMB have sort of signed up about 25 different union branches to a CLP, which could obviously outvote a ward. So I think the minimum demand at Labour Party conference is to reform that so that members can't get outvoted by small affiliated organisations. Even Anne Black today was sort of kind of backing that.
I don't think necessarily that's the biggest problem with the trigger ballot system. I think it's actually that the current MP has a lot of power and data and a ability to campaign a positive campaign, whereas people have to mount a negative campaign against the incumbent candidate. Because I think these are big affiliates, GMB and Unite are, and all the other unions and affiliates are important. However, there is going to be reform to that process because, as you say, people are unhappy with that at the moment. But yeah, I think if members want it to mount a positive campaign for a candidate, that's what they should be able to do. And I think even if it's not full open selection, reform of the trigger ballot system to lower the threshold for an open selection to take place. Maybe a positive campaign for if this many branches or affiliates support an open selection, that's what you should have, rather than if this many negatively want the MP out, then there should be a selection process to make it a more positive open campaign.
Well, that's just wording, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's about culture.
Yeah,
it is. And actually, a lot of this has been around MPs saying it's vicious and it's attacking them. So actually, a lot of it is about words and about culture. But you mentioned Anne Black, and her article in Labour List today was, I thought it was bad. It essentially said that selection campaigns mean that there's too many leaflets and it's too expensive. And I think
that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
I don't think that's a very good argument. And she's essentially saying that the title of the article, I don't know if she wrote the title, but it was if the system isn't broken, then don't change it. And I think people are going, well, the system is broken. People aren't happy with it at the moment. So I think that I didn't really agree with that analysis.
Too many leaflets.
Well, no,
it's expensive to run selection campaigns.
We can probably get this up if you Google Labour List and Black. It was an article from today.
Gary, don't worry.
There's a couple of people back there.
Don't worry about it. Just
look, we're not going to wait for it. It just might come up on the screen.
Go to Twitter, go to Amber. This sounds like the dumbest article ever.
Well, the headline was unfortunate because, as you said, the headline said, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." But anyone who for the past 3 years has looked at the relationship between the PLP, the leadership of the Labour Party and the Labour Party membership, the one thing everyone should be able to agree on is that it's broken. You might disagree on the solutions, but something's obviously broken. So you couldn't have a worse argument than that.
People canvassing regularly for candidates in democratic elections is great. And like bits of fucking paper through the letterbox talking about policy and political grievances and how to democratise Labour and democratise Britain and transform Britain is brilliant. Because most people, most days of the week, are reading the Metro. And it's garbage. So the idea that, we want to save on paper. No, yeah, we want to save on paper by scrapping the metro. We don't want to save on paper by having like open democratic debate within the Labour Party, especially if we want to have more and more members.
Well, so her argument was what was interesting about it, because obviously she has experience of being involved on the NEC and being involved in the Labour Party.
She has a lot of experience.
She was talking about the resources that are currently involved in any open selection process. So obviously we have an open selection process if an MP retires or if it's not currently a Labour-held seat. So she's saying this takes up a lot of time and resources the way that the Labour Party currently does it.
We just had one for the London mayor.
If we
Did
just
that take lots of money?
That wasn't open selection.
No,
that
but he had
wasn't
to be
open selection.
He had to be reselected.
Yeah, but that would be the same as
Her
he had a
argument
trigger
is that
ballot process the
MPs
same as any
who-
other MP.
MPs who are
the
going
moment.
to get reselected anyway because they're popular, why should we run an open selection process for that? Which is, I think, is where the compromise comes in for having sort of reform to the trigger ballot system and having a lower threshold, so that then MPs who are hugely popular don't have to go through a selection process again. So I see that side of things, but I think any argument to use sort of party resources needs to be taken very seriously, because we are a party with money now because of our mass membership, and we, as you say, we should be encouraging democratic selections of new and young and diverse candidates to run. So I think we just have to be careful with that particular line of argument.
One response, so I was on Sky arguing about mandatory reselection or open selections, and what Nora Mulready was saying, I don't know why she was debating, because she left the party because she was going to have a disciplinary process, I think, anyway.
After trying to assault
But she
Seamus.
sort of tried to get me from the left by saying, if you want to have open selections, why not have them with the general public? Why only have them with Labour members? I said I'd be happy with either. What do you think?
Well,
Would you be happy with open primaries in the way that they have in the United States?
the majority of people who voted Labour because of Labour, not of the candidate. So I think that, yes, they need the support of their local Labour Party, not the general public. And then they go forward and, and run an election with the general public. I think if you're going to run with the Labour name, when we're going to win the next general election, and you will have a job, then it should be up to local Labour Party members.
So you're into
to say.
closed primaries instead of open primaries?
But anyone can join the Labour Party, so...
It's true. What about if I'd be up for sort of like registered supporters? So it's because at the moment, what is it, £4 a month or something?
Yeah, but that's what a
I
membership
pay
is, right?
£3, for young
Yeah, I
Labour.
suppose that's commitment to an organisation. What do you think, Aaron? Open or closed primaries?
I think closed primaries for MPs. I could see the argument for open primaries for other positions, potentially like for city mayors, maybe. But for MPs, I don't think so, because you're trying to get through a national legislative programme, so it would undermine the coherence of the party form. I was chatting to somebody, a TV producer. You're going to name drop, but I'm going to do it too, Michael.
All right, babe.
And he was sort of, he was throwing the arguments to me that we're already acquainted with. We're going to discuss over the course of today. And one was, well, look, you've got a general election. Why would you want to waste resources at the beginning of the campaign by choosing a candidate? And I said, well, actually, that's not how it works here. What better way is there to start your general election campaign as a CLP than getting 250 people in a room, deciding a candidate, being invested in that candidate, and saying, now you're all here, campaigning starts the day after tomorrow, go here, here's a grid, the first week's action, the secretary can get that all done in advance. I can't think of a better way to start a general election campaign. What's more, the whole CLP, the membership, feels invested in the candidate. They have immediate name recognition. People are already talking about them. That's so much better than what we presently have. So it's not this zero-sum thing where, we only have so much energy and so much time and so much money, and if you don't use it, if you use it here, you won't use it here. That's just not true in politics. Enthusiasm, engagement, momentum, these are net positives, and they bleed into... from selections into more general election processes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the argument that Momentum are explicitly making, which is that if you look at the effect that sort of open primaries had in the United States, so in terms of the Tea Party movement, there'd have been many people in the Republican Party establishment who would have thought this is a drain on our movement because we're having to devote all this energy to this grassroots movement that's trying to get rid of some of our most high up, most authoritative representatives. It turned out, obviously I disagree with the politics, but it turned out to be a massive bonus to them electorally, because what that did is it meant that all the grassroots energy was going into the Republican Party. The Democratic Party, which until Bernie Sanders was quite insulated from popular pressure, they ended up being a centrist party with no real popular participation, and they lost both houses. So I think if you look at the United States, then in the short term, yeah, it can seem disruptive. It can seem disruptive when some of your most successful representatives get replaced by an upstart that you think is extreme. But in the medium term, it's an incredibly successful electoral strategy.
Yeah, 100%. I think what I've always believed is like the Labour Party becoming a mass movement means that actually a lot of people have to devote less time to it, which sounds sort of counterintuitive, but the reality is like I do Labour Party stuff in my free time. It's not my full-time job, and the Labour Party shouldn't be full of activists where the Labour Party is their full-time job or they work in politics. It should be normal people coming out for half a Saturday to campaign. If you have a mass movement, everyone can give as much of the time as they can. And actually, under Blair and when our party membership was a lot smaller, people had to give colossal amounts of their time. And in general election campaigns, they were completely worn out. And as much as that commitment is amazing and people still do it now, we should have a party where it's got tons of people and they just give what they can because they're normal, ordinary people working and talking alongside the electorate every day.
Aaron.
Can I just say we've got 400 people watching this now? Let's get up to 600, okay? Click the subscribe button, share this on Twitter, share this on Facebook. Hugely important debate ahead of next week. This is literally happening next week. Hugely important debate. It's going to determine really the future of the Corbyn project, potentially the future of British politics. Maybe you might think I like to oversell things. I mean, this is genuinely true. It's a hugely important debate. We've been talking about it for years. Click the subscribe button, share this show. Let's get it above 600. Maybe get a thumbs up as well. That'd be great. You were going to ask me a question?
I was going to ask you a question.
Go on.
But I'm going to link it to what you just said. So you're saying this reform would be pretty vital for the possibility of a successful Corbyn government, to be able to renew the people who are on the PLP's benches, to have some MPs that are more supportive of Corbyn, and to allow some of the talent within the movement to rise to the top and become representatives in Parliament. It won't be a surprise that I agree with that. Two people that apparently don't. Quite surprising. Rebecca Long-Bailey and John McDonnell. So I'll give you their quotes this week. So Becky Long-Bailey said, I think this was on BBC Radio 5 Live, she said, "This is all a difficult topic and we should be careful with proposals like this. We want it to be a democratic party where members feel they have their say. But the other side is if an MP has to go through a mandatory reselection process every 3, 4, 5 years, their attention would be drawn away from Westminster."
Wait. Every 5 years? There's a general election every 5 years.
No, but that's what
I might lose my job. Yeah, you might lose your job when there's a general election. Does that mean that you can't attend to a business at Westminster? There's a general election in 5 years? That's ridiculous.
Well, so her argument is that you'll have someone who's doing a good job in the shadow business job, or it could actually be the business job if you're in government. Yeah. And they're distracted by the fact that they have to go back and keep their members on side.
It means they can't neglect their members, yes.
So why do you think she's saying that?
Well, I mean, I disagree with her. It's not a how to put this? It's not an adversarial thing. People say things when they're inside big institutions for a number of reasons. So Lara, how old are you, Lara? 21. Lara's doing incredibly well. She goes on the NEC. She's new in the NEC with really radical ideas. I know Lara won't deviate from that because she's a very principled, strong person. But it's very difficult because you meet all these people that have all these ideas. They agree on a bunch of issues, and you're going to be drawn in a number of ways. And so I think what's happened with Becky Long-Bailey is, she works with her colleagues. I'm sure she gets on with many of them. And she probably wants radical change, but she thinks mandatory selection's a bit too far. In the case of John McDonnell, I don't know. I'm not going to ventriloquize.
I'll give you his quote first. So John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor John... I've actually copied and pasted this from whatever article I was reading. So the quote, "I think that works quite effectively, but that will be a debate." So he's talking about the current system. "I can't see it going through, but you never know on these occasions." So he's basically said the trigger ballot, as it currently exists, works. And he doesn't think that anything else will pass.
I love John McDonnell. I think that's a nonsense, and I think he's wrong. I think something will pass. But that's fine. Look, people get stuff wrong, and he's like the Shadow Chancellor. His primary sort of problem should not be mandatory selection. His primary problem is reorganising the British economy and power. That's fine. Again, like Lara said, we're a mass movement, we're a mass party. That's okay.
So you're an insider now, Lara. So you don't necessarily know all of these people, but you sit on the NEC. You see
with Becky,
the parliamentary bloc. Oh yeah, Becky's on the NEC, isn't she?
So she'll be able to voice these concerns.
Can you put a word in for us?
Yeah, go on. I don't think either of them are coming from bad places or anything. I completely respect both of them, and I understand they're very popular MPs, so I understand that John thinking the system works now because he's in a popular seat, so maybe he doesn't understand where some CLPs, it's actually a thing that comes up again and again when their MP is consistently ignoring party members, a local constituency. So maybe it's partly that, and maybe it is partly what Becky's saying is the truth, is that she doesn't want to have to fight an open selection campaign when she's got to fight a general election. She does amazing work in her constituency, so I can see that being true as well. But we have 6, if not more, 6 explicitly MPs on the NEC, and then we have Jeremy, Tom and Ian Lavery ex officio. So they have their voice on the NEC, and they can raise this, and they have their voice in the party, and they'll speak about this. So,
but ultimately they can get outvoted. So you say,
well, yeah, they can, because the party is
be.
550,000 members, not the Parliamentary Labour Party, and they understand that and they support that. I don't think either of them would be against what passed.
Yeah, no, I mean they seem like they're Democrats, right? I mean, the thing that surprises me about it is you say that both John and Becky are popular in their CLP, so they might think, why should we bother having a process for which we're probably going to win? But what they both understand is what it's like to be completely undermined in your job and the project that you're trying to pursue by a bunch of people sitting behind you who have no interest in it being a success. So obviously I'm talking about the backbenchers that only want to undermine the potential of transforming the economy in the way that both of them want to do. And that's why it surprises me that having tolerated for 3 years the sniping, the constant, every time they turn on the TV news, there's one of their backbenchers talking about how Chris Leslie, who last week was made into a Tory attack ad because he had said
his career is one big attack ad.
He'd said that Labour's policies, John McDonnell's policies, would mean that everyone's tax would have to be doubled. You know, like it's completely bizarre. So the idea that John McDonnell or Becky Long Bailey would want to keep the system as it currently is, I just find that quite surprising.
Well, yeah, you're completely right. It's very scary that we could win a general election and not have a socialist majority in the House of Commons. What Chris Leslie said was outrageous and completely at odds with what John McDonnell has been promoting in the party and what the majority party members think, which is anti-austerity, and that's been proved again and again. That's where the party membership are at. That's where a lot of the country are at. So for him to come out and say that is, as you say, the Tories just use it as an attack ad. That's ridiculous. I forgot the question. I'm too angry.
The question was, why does John McDonnell not want mandatory selection? I mean, obviously, it's criminology to ask that question.
He's the new nice guy, isn't he? That's his thing now. Nice guy John.
I don't know. I think we can't underestimate how much John McDonnell has spoken out against sort of Blairite MPs and that kind of policy, more than anyone else who's probably wading into this debate. So I don't think we can question his commitment to against these ideas.
But it's not. I mean, it's not questioning his commitment. This is politics. So like, he is a figurehead. He's the second most important person in this project. So what he says clearly counts for a hell of a lot more than anything we say. So if he's not going to intervene decisively in favour of mandatory selection, that's perfectly sensible. As a politician, you know, he's not a regular member. So, I mean, yeah, we shouldn't judge him in the slightest.
Do we know, let's just on the very practical terms, when is this all going to be debated? What's the sort of steps by which we get from this conversation to this being passed?
So tomorrow there's an NEC meeting which will probably put forward the NEC rule changes to conference, which will get moved separately to the rule changes that are submitted from CLPs, etc. So there's a possibility that the NEC could decide on some reform of the trigger ballot system or something around selection of MPs because it wasn't in the democracy review, and then that would get moved by the NEC at conference. Next, the CAC, the Conference Arrangements Committee, would be compositing and deciding how much time there is to debate rule changes and which rule changes go through to the conference floor. And there's a lot of rule changes. There's one from Labour International, one from Bristol CLP, one from Hastings. So they're all a bit different, and some are reform to the trigger ballot, some are open selections, blah, blah, blah. So I can't say what's actually going to be debated on the conference floor. Obviously, if there is a proposal at NEC tomorrow, then I'll support something that at least reforms the trigger ballot system into something more accessible for new candidates, and for members to be able to vote against their current MP and have a new candidate. But yeah, that's essentially how it's going to work.
So one thing that happens at conference is when these this is getting a little bit technical now, but our audience might like technical stuff. So you get the rule changes that come up for vote on the conference floor, which have been proposed by various CLPs, in which the CAC, what does that stand for? Does anyone know? Constitutional Arrangement Committee.
Conference Arrangements Committee, I think.
They decide which gets ruled in or which gets ruled out, whatever, and then that goes onto the agenda. And then next to each potential rule change, it says whether or not the NEC recommend that people vote for it or vote against it.
Yeah.
Which doesn't matter that much with members, but it matters a lot with the unions. So do you decide that tomorrow, whether or not you're going to recommend people vote for or against
some of those
things?
Things are decided tomorrow, but actually, because this conference is unique, because we've got democracy review rule changes that the NEC are sort of proposing, I think. I mean, don't quote me on any of this because it's very confusing. But I think that we are moving some of the democracy review rule changes because they haven't been submitted officially by CLPs. So I think actually that might happen a bit later, our recommendations. But this is my first time with the NEC, so I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is all goddamn complicated, isn't it?
It is very complicated.
Should we move on to Brexit?
Well, speaking of complications, there's more than just this that's going to define democratic reform in the Labour Party this week.
Ooh, go on.
There's also the threshold in terms of electing a new parliamentary leader.
Yep.
And again, that's in the short term, that's even bigger, right? It was the big one until 2017 because, of course, people weren't sure whether or not Corbyn would be successful, whether or not we'd need a successor. So at present, it's 15% of.
No, so it's. I want to find this story because this is almost breaking news. It came out about 7 p.m. today.
It was 15%, and then my understanding was a rule change was put forward for 5%. Called the McDonnell Amendment.
That's right. So it's 10% now, right?
And then it was.
Yeah.
Is it effective now for 10%? I thought we were still at 15%.
I think it's effective.
No, so what it is, so what it is, I'll stop searching for the article. So it was 15%. Then last year at conference there was a big debate about the McDonnell Amendment, which was supposed to be 5% of the PLP who have to nominate someone before they can stand as leader. There was a compromise made, so the NEC agreed that they were going to recommend a 10% threshold. So you'd have to get the support of 10% of Labour MPs to be able to stand in a leadership election and have members vote for you. There was, before this conference, a proposal which, was supported by people from the Grassroots, but was also recommended by the previous NEC meeting. So this is why people were expecting it to pass, which was that instead of there being a 10% veto by MPs, someone could stand to be leader next time there's a leadership election if they have either 10% of the PLP backing them, or 10% of the unions, or 10% of CLPs. So you could potentially have very little support among the PLP, but be incredibly popular among the membership, and that would get you on the ballot. So that would have, in a way, lowered the threshold because you could go to different sources of support to qualify.
A polyarchy.
Exactly. Yeah.
A polyarchy is people who aren't listening. There's people who aren't listening. Probably many of you, because I've started talking. A polyarchy is where you have concentration. I'm trying the self-deprecation thing. A polyarchy is when you have multiple poles of power, and people often think of democracy as universal suffrage, one person, one vote, rule of law. That's all true, but also a democratic society or a democratic institution also has concentrations of power in many places. And I think this is a great way of looking at what's happening with the rule changes. So not just with mandatory selection, but also with electing a leader. It's not just about, the binary of the trade unions or the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, or the membership. These are all valid and important parts of the whole organisation. And it's about ensuring that, all of them have a lot of agency and feel empowered, and then they can work together, because at the moment, all of that power, or too much of that power, is concentrated with the Parliamentary Labour Party. And it's not to say let's take it away from them. It's just to say let's rebalance it a little bit with these other two bodies of opinion.
But the breaking news, so what changed, is that that's what we expected to be the recommendation from the NEC, but it was revealed today, or it was briefed today, that what the NEC are actually likely to agree, because obviously lots of horse trading happens before you guys actually meet, is that it's going to be, to stand to be the leader of the Labour Party, you need 10% of the PLP and 5% of affiliates. So it's actually increasing the threshold instead of lowering it. That's something that Momentum are opposed to. But I mean, presumably has been decided amongst the unions and the MPs, and that looks like it's going to pass tomorrow?
I don't know. I mean, we need to have the debate tomorrow, basically, between those two options. As you say, or even more than those options, probably. There's multiple different options, 0% of the PLP, etc. I think it's really difficult because I like the option of having 10 or 10 or 10 because it means that there's always going to be a selection process where people from each wing of the movement can propose a candidate. So I did really like the leadership contest in 2015 because I thought, you had 4 candidates. They represented a broad range of political opinions within the Labour movement, and that debate was had very honestly and very openly. And I think it was good. So I think I would support any contest that allowed a broad range of candidates to stand and then the membership decide. I'm not going to predict what the NEC are going to decide. I agree that it does it sounds like it makes it harder to nominate for a leader, but I think that the unions do and rightly should have a say in which candidates we propose, because we want more working class MPs, we want more working class trade unionists eventually becoming the leaders of the Labour Party. So I think that's probably why they're swaying that way. But as I say, I don't know what we're going to decide yet.
We're going to move on to talking about whether or not conference floor might push the idea of a second referendum onto the Labour leadership.
This is a bit more sexy, less wonky, more sexy.
First of all, I just want to advertise the fact that this was all a bit wonky, not that sexy, but partly because there's so many bloody options.
Yeah, it's important.
But it is important, and if you want to follow what's going on at Labour Party conference, we will be doing a nightly show from TWT, a nightly Tisky Sour, every evening at 8 p.m. from this Saturday to next Tuesday. So we'll be having, big, broad debates with various people who are at TWT.
What the hell are you talking
know,
about?
TWT.
Stop drinking.
There's an excellent lineup. But we will also be giving you a day-to-day update of what is going on at the conference floor. So it will be broken down slightly because obviously there'll be different things up for debate on each day, I presume.
And on Sunday, you should all, if you're 26 and under, you should be coming to the Youth Day, not TWT, which is all day on the Sunday if you're a delegate or you have a pass.
And make sure you're sitting in a Wetherspoons with your laptop using the free Wi-Fi to watch Tisky Sour from 8 p.m. Are they allowed to leave for that?
Yes.
Good. Excellent.
And can I just also say, because look, doing that every day, bringing coverage from the Labour Party conference, which is superior in every way to the BBC and Sky, and does not give you drip-fed horseshit, isn't free. Many of you have been kind enough to go to support.novaramedia.com to help us build that new media for different politics. Guess what? We're winning. But yeah, it doesn't come for free. If you can make any kind of contribution at all, one-off or ongoing, go to support.novaramedia.com. And I think by the end of next week, you're going to say, wow, this is a great resource for the left. That's what we're trying to do. So yeah. Don't just click the subscribe button, is what I'm saying.
Click the support button.
Because, Michael doesn't, he has a haircut every week. We can't, that doesn't come for free.
It's lost
fresh.
its shape, I think.
I had actually. This is long for you. For Michael, this is like out of control. It's like Medusa.
Yeah, I know. You just can't tell the difference between the top and the side of my head.
I told you men are obsessed with their hair. Didn't I say this just like 10 minutes ago?
It's true. All right, we're going to move on to the next big issue.
Sexy Brexit.
Sexy Brexit. You know what I don't find sexy, actually?
Brexit?
Yeah. But anyway.
People disagree, don't they?
Yeah. So one controversy at this year's Labour Party conference is going to be about selection of MPs. The other big one, it seems, unless something comes up on the weekend or is fabricated by the British mainstream media, will be the Brexit vote. So I think of the contemporary motions, so that's CLPs have been able to propose motions to conference over the last couple of months to be debated on the conference floor. And the one that has been proposed more than any other is whether or not Labour should, well, not whether or not, it's proposing that Labour commits to a second referendum. Will that definitely be debated at Labour Party conference?
I'm not on the CAC, so I can't really say.
Oh, so it's them who decide, is it?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd say like at Seema Chanwani, but I know that she's been getting a bit annoyed by everyone.
Yeah, she's been getting a lot of lobbying, and I think
she's a legend.
So, yeah, we elect the CAC representatives because we support what their politics are, and I'm very sure in Seema's politics, and she's going to try and get a lot of time debated for the rule changes and all that. So I don't know if it'll get debated. I mean, I'm completely against the motion that's been proposed on a second referendum, the people's vote, but that's just my opinion. And if the Labour Party branches have submitted a lot of motions for it, then maybe it should be debated. But yeah.
Aaron, do you think by the time of the end of the conference, the Labour Party will be officially committed to a second referendum?
If it does, we're fucked. Frankly, there's a few things actually that are integral to Labour winning the next general election. One is, I think, enhancing the democratic procedure will give Labour a bigger majority. I would argue, and we can all be wrong about things, mandatory selection will give Labour a very big majority. The present process, I think they'll still win, but I just don't think it'll be that big. I think you're only going to have a mass movement if they feel invested in the politics, and therefore win that big parliamentary majority. But then if we're committed to a second referendum, I mean, I will abstain. I'll say this right here, right now. I'm sure, clip this up, leave.eu, and when I'm fucking canvassing on the day of the second referendum, you're like, that lying bastard. Fine, because you know what? They're all fucking lying bastards. That's the thing. You got. I shouldn't say the B word. Sorry. They're all being duplicitous.
The other B word.
You had Sadiq Khan on the Mars show. They were showing him footage saying, "But you said this is a one-off. You can go check this out on Twitter." He goes, "Never again. This is the final vote." And now he's like, "I'm now thinking, we should have a second referendum." But it's not really a second referendum. It's deciding on what happens. It's like, well, that was the first referendum. And so I think if Labour commits to this, if Jeremy Corbyn goes around campaigning for Remain in a second referendum campaign, I think Remain would lose. Remain would lose.
By a bigger percentage.
I believe that, yes, very much so. Definitely. I really do believe that. And I think the entire political establishment would be more discredited than they already are. And Labour would be really screwed in the long term. And all the people that go, ridiculous, Remain would win. These are the precise same people that thought like Yes to AV was going to win in 2011. Or that said, the SNP will only get 5 seats in 2015. Just shut. Or that Jeremy Corbyn was going to get 15%. These mad people that are saying Labour will have their lowest ever share of the votes since 1918. These people now all think they're right about a second referendum. Maybe take a day off. Maybe log off and shut up. Because you're wrong about this, like you've been wrong about all the other stuff.
All right, Aaron brought up something we were going to talk about in about 10 minutes, but we're going to talk about it right now. This is Sadiq Khan. Can we get Sadiq Khan up on Andrew Marchais? Calling for a second referendum, which he is convinced will not be a second referendum, even though he will be campaigning for Remain. It doesn't really make any sense, but let's get that up. In the meantime, Lara, you'll just get cut out at some point by Sadiq Khan, but we'll do that in the meantime.
That's fine.
Do you think this could pass? I'm asking for your clairvoyant skills again.
I don't know. Do I want it to pass, or do I think it will pass?
No, I want clairvoyancy. I want you to predict the future.
I don't think it will pass because, as I completely agree with what Aaron said, I think it's ridiculous and it will be a big slap in the face to working people in this country, and it will enhance all the views that people have got of the establishment and the disillusionment with politicians who don't listen to them, who are stuck in Westminster. We haven't, if there was a second referendum or we supported it, we haven't even, in over how many years has it been, begun to address the problems or the reasons why people have voted leave without patronising them. I think it's ridiculous, and it would be electoral suicide, but also it would be the wrong thing to do. And we actually need to engage with the left-wing arguments of why there's opportunities outside the EU and why there should be a general election. Like, Brexit is not going to be good because the Tories are in charge of it. If there was a Labour government now, we could ensure that being outside the EU meant that we could advance the socialist project. It's going to be short-term problems, but I think there could be long-term benefits to it, which is why a lot of people on the left were committed to voting leave. And no one's tried to, in the People's Vote campaign, has tried to engage with this. Instead, they have stood on platforms with Lib Dems and Tories who cause some of the problems which caused some people to vote leave in the first place. It's ridiculous, and we shouldn't be sharing platforms with these people.
Interesting.
Do you think that there's a wing of the Labour Party which is now actively advocating for a second referendum to ensure that Corbynism isn't successful?
Yes.
Yes, you think that?
Definitely.
I like that. Well, I mean, that's a bold claim. Let's look at Sadiq Khan. Should we look at Sadiq Khan? Because he would be one of those people if they do exist.
of a second referendum, you have changed your mind quite dramatically.
This is really important. I'm not one of those advocating for a rerun. I'm not a referendum guy. What I'm saying is, for the first time ever,
we need a second referendum.
The British public should have a say on the outcome of the negotiations, including what the Prime Minister negotiates with the EU, plus the option of staying in the EU.
Let's just remind ourselves what you said after the first referendum on LBC.
I think the problem for those of us who are saying to the British public there should be a second referendum, it will lead to even more cynicism. It will lead to the British public saying, hold on a sec, these were the rules of the game, we voted in record numbers, and now you're ignoring us. And I've got grievances about the way the campaign was conducted, but the reality is, Gillian, the British public had a say. They voted, and they voted to leave. And my job as the Mayor of London is to heal some of the rifts that were created during the campaign and make sure our city carries on being the greatest city in the world. And I've done that. So one of the things I could have done over the last 2 years and 3 months is cross my arms and watch it all fail and say, I told you so. I've met David Davis 8 times. I met the Prime Minister, the Chancellor.
But you said then, no going back. It would create cynicism and create rifts. What's changed?
And it's really important that this is not a rerun of the referendum, but the British public having a say for the first time on the outcome.
But it is a second referendum. That's what it is.
Yeah, but when the campaign was taking place, Boris Johnson said we could leave the EU and have access to the single market. Untrue. Liam Fox said this would be the easiest trade deal to be done in history. Untrue. Nobody said there'd be jobs being lost. We have from London already the European Medicines Agency leaving London to go to Amsterdam, 900 jobs plus some. We've already got example of Euroclearing leaving London. We have NHS wards.
So the evidence...
I'm sorry, but there is not a weaker argument I've ever seen on Andrew Marr. I think actually, if you want to make the argument that we should have a second referendum because new information has become available, and when people voted in 2016, they were told things would be possible which weren't, and I think they were told there was a plan for leaving the EU, and there definitely wasn't. I still don't think it'd be a good idea to have a second referendum. But the idea that you can pretend this wouldn't even be a second referendum. You say, oh no, this is the first time the British public will be able to vote on the deal. He's going to campaign for Remain. If you're campaigning for Remain, how can you say you're not doing a rerun of the referendum? It's just completely incoherent, and no one's going to believe it. If you want to launch a second referendum, which I think is legitimate, as I say, I think it's a bad idea, there's no worse way that you could do it than with what's so obviously a disingenuous lie.
Yeah, people who support a people's vote, they it's a vote on the deal, we should get a final say, it's a very complex referendum. But then you ask them, okay, so what happens when you reject the deal?
Well, he's even saying
second referendum, like vote Remain. That's what they mean.
Yeah, because you just have to ask one question. So so it's not a second referendum. What are you going to campaign for? Oh, Remain. Well, sounds like a second referendum.
What's the question?
What did you campaign for last time? Well, Sadiq wants it to be Remain or the deal.
Everyone wants different things, though. So even the people who agree with the second referendum, which is a minority, can't even agree on what the question would be. So it's not a sustainable thing that's going to happen if they can't even agree on the question.
So
a referendum got us into this situation. Our political system, for all of its limits and failures and flaws, is you elect people at Westminster, they enact laws. If you don't like them, you get rid of them. It's not perfect, okay? Has lots of problems, but we do know it allows for continuity. This is crazy. You can't carry on like this. You can't keep having referendums, and when the establishment loses, they say we rerun it again.
But they don't even say they rerun it. They say we're having a completely different vote on the same question.
Yeah.
I mean, what you should say is, this is what Labour's line has to be. We want a general election. This is what we'll do in government in regard to Brexit. I would favour, I'd call it a soft Brexit. It's not staying in the EEA, but it's basically progressive stuff on Ireland, progressive stuff in regards to trade, relatively progressive stuff on migration. You'd clearly need to have visas of some kind for European nationals. I think basically there'll be no changes to what there presently is. That's basically the Labour policy, right? And you take that to the electorate, and when you win a majority in Westminster, that's what you do. You don't need to have all this fucking shitty, wacky people's vote on this and this and this, and then you're not even talking about... Who cares what happens if Theresa May is still the Prime Minister? It's madness. And they're working, conjuring all these new little schemes because they just don't want Jeremy Corbyn to be the Prime Minister. That's the main thing here.
If Theresa May is obviously the one who they want to call this second referendum, or this people's vote, or whatever you want to call it, she will be the one, the Conservatives will be the one writing the question. So to have any kind of thought that we're going to have some sort of say over what the question's going to be or whatever, it's just silly. It's going to be an establishment, a Conservative referendum, if there is another one. So if we should spend all this energy lobbying for another general election, that's what we should be doing.
So the one argument for a second referendum that makes sense, I think, because obviously what's ideal for a Labour Party is you have a second general election. Well, not a second, I keep saying this, but you have a general election. They happen all the time, not a second or third or fourth or whatever it is. And you get into power, and either you run that general election on a Remain platform, which I think would be a terrible idea.
Exactly.
Or you run it on a soft Brexit platform, which I think would be a good idea. That's ideal for the Labour Party. You say the Tory Brexit that they're about to subject our country to is going to be a nightmare. We saw on the weekend Tim Shipman's piece talking about how Sajid Javid was talking about how he wanted a no-deal Brexit to be an excuse, an opportunity to cut taxes, to cut regulations, and to basically make Britain even more attuned to the interest of finance capital as opposed to workers. So I feel like the idea that you want to stop that by any means necessary is somewhat reasonable. And to call a general election, you need 2/3 of Parliament, whereas to call for a referendum, you need 50% of Parliament. So the barriers are slightly lower.
Yeah, but we're not going to be writing the question. So
well, then what comes from this is the idea that the only question that could potentially get a majority in Parliament is if it had 3 options, which would be no deal, deal, or Remain, because you could potentially get some cross-parliamentary support for that, especially if Theresa May, when she tries to take a deal to the Parliament.
Win. That's crazy. Any of those 3 could win.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe they just all want to flip a coin. I mean, it's a risk for every single
but then
party involved.
No deal, we get the hardest of hard Brexits. That's guaranteed, right?
Well, you'd have to have... So if there was 3 options, you'd have to have a second choice system, right?
STV.
So you'd have to have STV. Well, it's not STV. It'd be
Preference
alternative vote. So
it is STV.
Is that what STV
transferable
is?
vote, yeah.
Transferable
They're all like
vote.
numbers rather than X's, aren't they?
So Theresa May would probably hope that because Leavers and Remainers would both have deal as their second choice.
The maximum strategy would be like the Theresa May deal, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the risk-averse rational choice. If rational choice theory tells us anything.
So you'd say Remain 1, deal 2. But then considering how unpopular
that's
Chequers
true,
is...
actually. Theresa May should do that. That's really true.
But the Remainers would want that as well because they think they might win on first preferences with Remain.
They obviously wouldn't.
Well, deal is quite... Chequers had like 15% support. But I mean, it would be...
It's about maximin, right? People like Julian Moore or even... No, look, go away from Twitter. Go away from Westminster. Somebody who has like a small business, or they work in the public sector and they're worried about their pension, or they're worried about their house losing price, like value. The Chequers is okay. You know, it's not bad. You don't want to fuck about.
And actually, I suppose you'd have all the newspapers offering their version of
including
maximum, right?
the Daily Mail.
So the Daily Mail would be saying vote no deal and deal second.
No,
the Guardian
Daily
would be
Mail,
saying vote Remain
the Daily Mail
and
would say
deal as second.
The Daily Mail would say Chequers.
You think?
Well, because you've got this new guy, Geordie Gregg. The woke Daily Mail now talking about how many women are in our shadow cabinet.
I thought didn't they do that to try and shame Jeremy Corbyn, and then he didn't find it shameful.
Yeah, it was like a really good article, actually.
Yeah, it was his wall of what was it? He was
it was like the horseshoe of diverse people around Jeremy. It was like great.
This racist party, which has a record number of BAME people in Parliament, the highest share of the BAME vote ever.
50-50 shadow cabinet.
Yeah.
First time.
So racist, according to Chuck Ruminer.
Going back to what you said about a hard and a soft Brexit, to be fair, I don't really think that is something we should necessarily be buying into, because I think it's a false dichotomy, and that you're also talking about a hard Brexit in the context of a Tory party doing a hard Brexit, right? You know, and using it as an excuse to privatise, to roll back regulations, to reduce taxes on the richest and corporations. And that wouldn't happen if Labour was in power. And yeah, I'm not saying that Brexit or a hard Brexit or no deal would have no effects on the economy, because it would. But I think we have to remember we're talking about this from a Tory context, and a lot of people voted it because they wanted the long-term effects of Brexit and the long-term seeing a Labour government in power in the future, and able to nationalise things and do things without EU regulation. So I think we have to keep that in mind, that a lot of people do want a hard Brexit, but they want it in the context of a Labour government.
So for me, why I talk about a soft Brexit is because I think the best argument for a soft Brexit position isn't actually that it's the one that will make Britain in the long term richer. It's that it's the one that can take the majority of the public with us. Because, I mean, I honestly think that Brexit is a bit of a distraction. I think if you look at the problems that Britain has right now,
but that's
the reasons...
strategic. Sorry to interrupt. You're looking at it as a strategic political problem. How do you get into government whilst dealing with this? But the reality is Brexit's more than simply a strategic problem, isn't it?
No, but people understand
it's going
that.
to completely remake immigration and trade policy, etc., etc. So on the one hand, somebody might say, somebody who totally disagrees with you on the what should be done here would say, well, if I was a Labour supporter, I would say the same thing. But does that mean it's the best thing for public services or for immigration or for? I think it is, but you're dealing it as purely a strategic question. It isn't, right?
Well, I think probably on a technocratic level, considering that no one has a particularly good plan for a hard. I think soft Brexit is unideal. I think soft Brexit to me looks a bit like you have most of the constraints of the EU, maybe with a couple of compromises on the side, but you have less influence on how the policy is made. Hard Brexit, to me, looks like no one's really come forward with a plan that can properly make that work. And so if you're looking at it at a purely technocratic level of how will Britain have the highest growth rates, it'll probably just be Remain. But I think that would be a disaster because that would be so socially divisive that we should go for...
Hard Brexit doesn't need a plan.
What do you mean hard Brexit doesn't need a plan?
I mean, it's not even like it's not a no deal. It's WTO rules. There's literally 50 years worth of more. There's GATT and then WTO rules. There's 70 years of international trade rules governing what we will do. The idea that there's no deal, it'll be chaotic and vans. If it is hard Brexit and people know that well in advance, that's a very clear thing. The idea that it's
Well, it's a thing, but it's no one's suggesting that's particularly desirable to just go back to WTO terms with no other form of deal.
It might be. It might be. It might be because you re-advantage, for instance, domestic agricultural producers. If you have a devaluation of the currency, you'll re-advantage the domestic tourism industry. People can't afford to go to Magaluf or to France; they'll go to the south coast of England. So we don't know, I
don't think we've properly analysed actually what it will mean. I mean, the Labour Party lobbied or found out that the Tories, after a year or something after the Brexit vote, hadn't even done assessments of how it was going to affect certain sectors that they clearly don't care about, like the NHS and things like that. And I think the thing is with the soft Brexit, the term, I think people mean different things when they say that. That's why I think it's an unhelpful term to use, because I think when people hear hard Brexit, some people on the right think, great, cracking down on immigration and these racist... the racist narrative comes out, and some people on the left think that hard Brexit just means that we'll be free to nationalise more and do more things that we want to in our socialist manifesto. Not saying I agree with that, but we got to remember what these terms mean for some people. Some people mean soft Brexit mean essentially Remain and a few small, and some people mean soft Brexit we are leaving and we're going to be progressive on things like immigration and so we have to be careful with using these words because people will see it in you couldn't have had that on a ballot paper.
Well, so for me, soft Brexit, what that means is that you stay in the customs union, which means you can't do any of that whole we're going to be a global Britain making our own free trade deals, because I think that was quite a bad idea anyway.
Yes, definitely.
I don't think many people in the public really care about whether or not we can make a free trade deal with the United States. We'll be a smaller partner and we'll be weaker in those negotiations, and we'll end up probably with worse terms. So I don't think many people voted Brexit because they wanted Britain to make their own trade deal. So I think we stay in the customs union, which is something that the Tory party can't accept because too many people in their parliamentary party, too many of their MPs are sort of obsessed with this idea of Britain being this powerful, independent force that can sort of make deals on its own terms in a sort of imperial, nostalgic sort of sense. So I'd say that's one way in which Brexit would be soft. And the other one is how close you go to the single market, right?
Can I just deal with some of these comments?
Yeah.
So somebody here has said, the only country in the world that trades solely under WTO rules is Mauritania. I'm not suggesting that we have WTO rules forever. I'm saying day one, when we have a hard Brexit, no deal, there is a deal. There are very clear rules by which you conduct trade. There just are. So, and that won't happen, by the way, next year. I really believe that we'll have a further suspension of a couple of years anyway. and what you're saying, Michael is saying about us independently negotiating trade deals, that is completely, like, there's lots of stuff I sometimes start with the hard Brexiteers, you're like, that's kind of true, right? Parliamentary sovereignty, kind of what they're saying is true. If you pull sovereignty in the EU, we had a democratic discussion about that. I think one of the few facts about the Leave campaign was that, yes, we don't make our laws in this country. I don't really care about that in many respects. I think the European Court of Human Rights is a good thing, but it's also true, right?
You might care if Labour get into government and they start blocking, some
Yeah,
of the
well, yeah, that's true. But generally speaking, I mean, we have international law.
That's never happened, right? So there's never been a government that's wanted to introduce something socialist, and EU law has stopped them.
No, I'm not.
In the case of Greece, it wasn't even EU law that stopped them.
I'm not talking about
they
that,
were
though.
in massive.
But these are the potential
I'm
arguments.
not talking about
that we
EU
need to
law.
consider.
I'm talking about like European human rights. I'm talking about, for instance, stuff like the ICC. If we want to fucking get hold of some dictator, I do believe in international law. You go back to Grotius and like all the stuff from the 16th century. I do believe in international law. I don't believe the idea of a sovereign state, self-determining. I don't think it's impossible, right? So the question is, how far do you want to go between these two poles? That said, the thing about trade is clearly ridiculous, and clearly it makes lots of sense for us to be a member of the EU and negotiating external trade policy. The thing is, a lot of that trade policy is really fucked up, and we have no agency in doing it. So on the one hand, economically it's beneficial, but as a socialist, how do you feel about the European Commission, which isn't subject to democratic scrutiny, and that's where the trade competence lies? Trade policy with external parties, so a bilateral trade agreement between the EU and Democratic Republic of Congo is done by the Commission. It's unaccountable, it's unelected.
No, but lots of, so the TTP or TTIP, because that was the European one, wasn't it? TTP was with East Asia. That was going to have to get passed by many a national government.
Forget TTP, because that never happened. Let's talk about the stuff that actually happened.
No, but trade deals.
Let's look at the ones that we can talk about ones that actually happened. So, for instance, you've got the Cotonou Agreement, which was basically a continuation, and you can Google this Cotonou Agreement. It's a continuation of trade policies between previous colonial powers that was then continued into European trade policy with sub-Saharan Africa. And it's more recently become, I think, called the Lomé Agreement. And this was about the systematic underdevelopment of sub-Saharan Africa and its trade relations with the European Union. Now, as a socialist, I think that's grotesque. But we also have to understand that an independent Britain, yes, we'd want a more progressive trade policy with some of the world's poorest countries, but that would also be very bloody difficult. So it's a mess. It's a mess.
No, I think EU parliaments get over new trade deals. I think EU parliaments get a veto.
Well, we've made a lot. So all the bilateral trade agreements we presently have been independently negotiated by the Commission.
I think they get negotiated by the Commission, but they have to get ratified by national parliament. So if you had a socialist government in the UK, someone in the comments tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm not an expert.
I don't think that's true. I think trade is definitely a competence that resides with the Commission.
I think.
Do you know the answer to this, Lara?
No, but I was going to move it on because someone will know.
Yeah.
What you touched on, something which I think is important, which is also like how we're looking at the rest of the world in this, and not just from a Tory free market perspective and the trade deals we're going to make, but actually how we have a progressive and a socialist outlook to the rest of the world, how we support whether that's socialist countries or we support poorer countries. I think that needs to come into this. And a lot of people argued in the Brexit debate, why do we have free movement of Europeans, but we have a hard immigration system for those who live outside the EU? And actually, this has become a debate where, yes, we're talking about, there's been awful rhetoric around immigration, but no one seems to have talked about the rest of the world and actually how we can support and be supported by the rest of the world with like a long-term approach to how we want to create a socialist world.
Can I say one thing? Because it's a very good point. I've just finished a great book. I tweeted about it, History of the World and 7 Cheap Things. Brilliant, right? Best book I've read this year. And one of the best chapters in it was about cheap care, social reproduction. Now, often on the left, social reproduction can be a very flaky thing. People talk about it because they think it's a good thing to talk about. It makes you sound good. Hugely important in terms of understanding the reproduction of capitalism. And this was so succinct and well written. And when you hear people say, well, we need immigration because we're going to need the doctors and we're going to need the care workers, this idea of cheap subsidized labor engaging in the social reproduction of a working population in the global north is exploitation. It is exploitative. And so when we say, well, we need these people to do the NHS, in the short term, we clearly do. obviously. But a socialist country in the long term would be educating so many nurses, so many doctors, so many midwives that they could go to the global south, right? Like Cuba did. Ideally, the idea that we would necessarily be dependent upon imported labour to work in these areas of such importance that they constitute human rights, health, I think is absurd. So, yeah.
All right, I think we should move on to questions soon. While you're writing those questions, I want us to move on to a next point of discussion, but it has a video first, which is what went down at the Lib Dem conference today. This is Gina Miller talking to rapturous applause, and I think it really shows you the state of the Lib Dems in this current moment. We still haven't worked out where it was, by the way. If anyone in the comments...
Brighton.
Oh, it was in Brighton, was it?
Again.
Okay, are we ready to get that up? Gina Miller at the Lib Dem conference? No biggie. Yeah.
Today I speak to you as a friend, someone who feels a bond with you on so many issues. But may I say straight away, particularly for the journalists in the audience who might be speculating, I am not addressing you as your leader in waiting. Truth be told, I'm not a member of any party. But I want, all the same, to see the Liberal Democrats strive. Because in a healthy democracy, we need a strong third party, every bit as much as we need a strong opposition, and a strong government, and a strong Prime Minister. Now, more than ever, on all sides of the political arena, we need statesmen and stateswomen doing what they genuinely believe is right for our country, not just reflecting society, but shaping it. At home, each of our political parties have their issues, but centrist politics throughout Europe and United States is now really struggling to make headway. At the very time when Western cultures need reasonable, conciliatory, sensible voices more than ever. As the great Dame Shirley Williams has warned, the fascism of the left is every bit as terrifying as the destructive fascism of the right. Liberalism has become a dirty word in the mouth of both the extreme right and left, because it interferes with their hard and cold ideologies, both of which abhor the freedom of the individual.
This is crazy.
All right, both guests. Are you surprised the Lib Dems are in God's year 2018 having headline speeches about left-wing fascism?
Sad but not surprised. Yeah.
Aaron, you want to
Go on,
expand?
because no, it's the first.
I'm gobsmacked.
Because Lara had
It's the first time you've seen it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Me and
it's
Aaron
the
both watched it
first
today, so you're just sort of like blown away.
And I was just sort of, oh, that's very posh, talking about the need for third party when it sounds like, you know, she doesn't really need change. The status quo is going just fine. And then she comes out with left-wing fascism, and it's sort of like spit your drink out moment.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how you can say that in the climate of the sort of racist rhetoric in the UK and the rise of the far right in Europe, how you can say left-wing fascism. And then you look at Jeremy Corbyn and what does he want? Universal education, nationalised health service, like the rich to pay a bit more tax. Fascism.
I mean, it's a real neocon talking point, right? It's sort of like...
No, it's not. This is the extreme centre in action.
But left-wing fascism, like, who talks about left-wing? That reminds you of, like, proper, like, anti-communist, sort of, like,
Yeah, the
real
extreme
alt-right types.
The extreme centre. I mean, they feed into the far right. Obviously, they always punch left.
They're not centre, they're right-wing, aren't they?
No, yeah, but they're you know, they're neoliberals, so they have their primary conviction is one of market orthodoxy, and then clearly the politics and the sort of the social values thing moves all over the place. But what I would say is, look, when Hitler took power, if you read Gina Miller, OBE, I think, is she an OBE?
Oh,
Goes to show that means fuck all. Gina Miller, if you want to acquaint yourself with the history of the rise of fascism in Europe, find who Hitler blamed the Reichstag fire on. It was the German Communist Party. It gave him license to basically seize the German state. The people that were killed by the Nazis in power were Jews, homosexuals, the disabled, gypsies, and yes, communists. So you're comparing the people that were killed by fascists to fascists. Now, if you're ignorant and illiterate, that's not my problem. But as my advice to you would be really, don't broadcast it. Don't tell a party conference you're an idiot. You can have that for free.
Yeah, I think we're assuming that she has some political analysis of actually what's going on, when I think it's clear that she doesn't from that speech.
Yeah, it was odd, wasn't it? It's also odd, like, if your headline act says, like, oh, by the way, I'm never going to join your party. It's
And
not
you'll
a
always
particularly
be a
good sign,
third
is
party.
it? Yeah.
That's crazy. It's like, and the hallmark of a democracy is a third party. Why? What a fourth, a fifth, a sixth? Why just a third party? Why not? What? I don't get it. Like, actually, there's loads of two-party democracies, but whatever.
All right.
Go on, Lara.
I was just going to say, they think the two-party state is sort of some Stalinist thing, just because people have decided that actually the two major parties have something between them now to vote for, and it's meant that it's become more two-party, and apparently that's the same as democracy. You
can actually invert it, because previously, okay, we had three parties, but realistically it was a one-party state, right?
Yeah.
Because they all said the same thing. And now people are actually conversely offered a choice, and that's what she's angry about. And so the reality is the complete diametric opposite of what she is submitting. Which is that people have a choice. Even though there were three parties, there was only really one party. Now we actually, okay, yeah, there's a big polarisation in politics, but at least there are alternatives. If you're a one-nation conservative who likes low taxes, Theresa May's kind of good. If you want somebody who's more attuned to helping people, not big business, Jeremy Corbyn. And if you kind of like want the same thing and you think you're nice and you kind of a bit, you're a bit all over the place, you can vote Lib Dem.
You're rich.
Yeah.
But it used to be, so the Lib Dems used to pose themselves as sort of like the nicer, less ideological Labour, right?
And they had that luxury
Bit social
because...
Democrat, and then
They're more similar to the Tory party, though. I mean, obviously
they
propped
obviously
it up,
now
but, like,
well obviously they can't claim that anymore. So before 2010 they could claim that we're the sort of like nicer kind of social democrat version of Labour, and we're not tarnished by war.
Well, from my perspective, as someone who's joined the Labour Party in 2015 and was not politically engaged, before sort of 2013, 14.
Well, they were already tarnished.
Yeah, like I've never seen them as that. I've always seen them as like right wing and like just nice right wingers.
I was at university when quite naive people were voting for Nick Clegg with the idea that he'd abolish tuition fees.
Exactly, I never had that. I was just like, yep, they're traitors. They're right wing.
All right, some questions.
Can I just say as well, the Lib Dems are also two parties, right? They're the Social Democrats and the Liberals.
Well, not anymore. There's no Social Democrats in the Lib Dems anymore.
Origins.
But that's the tension.
No, but
So Charlie Kennedy was very much a continuation of the SDP, right? That was the politics of the SDP. Nick Clegg, David Laws were very much a continuation of the Liberal Party, which, right up until the early 1980s was very much a free market. They were the Tories before Thatcherism. And once Thatcherism came in, they didn't really have an economic project anymore. And they were a bit more socially liberal, which really, I think, accurately defines the politics of David Laws and Nick Clegg and all these idiots we'll never have to talk about ever again. Scottish guy. What was his name?
Scottish Lib Dem.
Yeah, red hair.
Oh, David Laws.
Danny Alexander.
Danny Alexander.
So
no, he was Labour.
Genuinely don't know who that
Danny
is.
Alexander. He
Genuinely never heard of him.
Was he the one who worked with George Osborne? Was he in that
He was the
department?
one whose only job before having a very senior position in the coalition government was being the press officer for Cairngorms National Park in Scotland. So
Oh, look, there's a picture.
these are the people that oversaw austerity.
Oh, that's Danny Alexander.
Yeah,
is it?
that's like in our great technocracy, a press officer for Cairngorms Park was a major actor in inflicting unprecedented declines in productivity and real wages in this country because we're a technocracy.
But Aaron, they did implement really, really brutal austerity, but they got some pretty important concessions in return.
Oh, like what?
5p bags.
Plastic bags. Why do you hate the environment, Aaron?
Yeah, benefit cuts are temporary. Plastic bags are forever.
That's probably true. The plastic bags, long after we're gone, that Pepsi bottle will still be at the bottom of the ocean. Fine. Okay. Point taken.
All right, some questions. Libertarian Socialist Future asks, will Bernie in 2020 help us with progressive trade deals? So I think the argument is sort of like, if we were to leave the customs union, could we have a new progressive trade bloc between socialists in Britain and socialists in America?
Well, one, it's not just about America. I think we need to get away from the kind of view of the world as America, Europe, and the rest. It's not just America. But then also, I don't think Bernie, I mean, obviously I want Bernie to be president, but we know that America and the different parts that make up the government and the state, it's so entrenched as this capitalist country, this imperialist country, that Bernie is not going to change things overnight. So yeah, I guess, but it's going to take a lot to change America in the right direction. So I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon, to be a bit of a pessimist.
It's true, actually. We don't comment on that much, do we? Because we always talk about if Jeremy Corbyn was to become Prime Minister, he'd be completely undermined and screwed over by the melts on the backbenches. But if Bernie were to become president, at least to sign new trade deals, you need Congress to approve it. And Congress is not going to have a socialist majority for a very long time.
I mean, the United States is the world, like, it's the capitalist hegemon. It's not going to do fuck all. Obviously, I want Bernie Sanders to be the president of the United States, and it's great that all these state senators win. But like you said, that project is 20, 30, 40 years away. Britain is a post-imperial power. We're, relatively speaking, geopolitically in decline. It's perfectly plausible that Britain will become like a lodestar for international socialism. Quite exciting. But if you're the global hegemon and the whole global capitalist economy is basically oriented around you and China, less so. So yeah, we have a lot of agency in this country that, I think in America will be far more difficult. Although that said, of course, if they prevail in the United States, then it changes everything.
A very easy question from Toby Gafer. How often does Michael shave his head? Every 10 days to 2 weeks.
Okay. You shave it yourself?
No, I go to... My barber is like my neighbour. He's a real sweetheart. So it's like quite a nice experience anyway. You know, go for a chat, get a nice skin fade. But we're not going to talk about that for that long. You don't know what a skin fade is? No. So a skin fade is when you go from skin to like a number one in a gradual process.
Oh, yeah.
So it fades.
Haircuts by numbers in boys, isn't it?
Dorje Boleskin, probably haven't pronounced that right. Is there any chance whatsoever that we will be able to keep freedom of movement?
Again, this is a question where it's like, do we think we're going to do it, or do I think that we should?
Well, you can answer either. Do you think we should? Do you think we will?
Like I said earlier, I think that we need to remember the rest of the world in this, and that EU freedom of movement has been great for Europeans, but has actually meant that it's been a lot harder from people from all around the world to get to Britain. I think we have to have that in mind. I know it's difficult because obviously we've had freedom of movement in Europe to like backtrack on that. A lot of people say, oh, well, we've had it, so why don't we raise the rest of the world to have complete global free movement? But I think that plays into the hands at the moment of capitalists. So yeah, I'd be quite concerned about that. And I also don't think it's practical. I don't think actually if we did leave the EU, then we would be, especially if we left the single market, we'd be able to keep it. But I think that is actually very different to how we treat immigration. And, you know, we can still have really high immigration and end freedom movement in Europe, you know, and we can have a progressive immigration policy, and we can end detention, unlimited detention, things like this. So I think
an interesting question is the what will actually happen. Yeah. Because I do think that we seem to be getting closer to potentially we will keep freedom of movement.
I think, broadly speaking, nothing will change.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think. It seems quite plausible that nothing will change, and we'll basically have to follow all the rules of the single market.
I think it will be hard to change, won't it? That's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, can I just say...
I don't know how they're going to sell it.
You know, upset the entire ultra-left with this one trick. Freedom of movement isn't good.
Ooh.
Okay? Capitalism has been moving around. There are factors of production. Land, labour, capital. Capitalism has been moving surplus labour around the whole world's population for 600 years. It is fundamental to it. And the idea that freedom of movement is somehow a worker's right which has been won is the dumbest thing you will ever hear. Yes, that doesn't mean it's not good. I'm very glad that people within the European Union, which happens to be a democratic polity, they can go work where they like. I like that. But the idea in sort of general that freedom of movement is progressive is completely incorrect. When the French moved up to 500,000 people across the Atlantic from sub-Saharan Africa to Haiti, or the British moved tens of thousands of people to Barbados to work on sugar plantations, do you know what they said? These people that were going in slave galleys and that were dying on these islands, do you know what they said? They said, oh, their lives are very difficult, but they're far better than they were in Africa. That was the progressive argument for slavery at the time. So when people talk about, people on 0 hours contracts or minimum wage in this country, living in hovels, they go, oh, but they're escaping the terrible conditions in their country. They're not coming here because it's so wonderful, the work is so great. I'm talking about people on low incomes, obviously. But because the countries they come from have been systematically underdeveloped by capitalism. The answer, therefore, and I'm not saying send them back, that's not what I'm saying. The answer, therefore, is to have a coherent international policy of development and how to economically develop these countries, which have been systematically underdeveloped by capitalism, global capitalism, which the British establishment has massively benefited from. So the idea that somehow freedom of movement is A, a solution to global poverty, and B, is just politically progressive, is dumb.
When we had motions come to sort of Young Labour and Labour Party meetings about free movement, the thing that really annoyed me is there was no mention of trade union rights in it. And I think that a lot of trade unionists in this country is certainly from anecdotal evidence of speaking to people, is that EU migrants are exploited in this country, and they're used by employers to divide and rule the workforce. And I think that when I've seen these motions which don't even mention trade unions, don't even mention the idea of a closed shop, which I think would be a very good first step to try and tackle some of these problems, especially if free movement was to continue, that would be a step that needs to be implemented pretty quickly. So I think that a lot of people putting forward these motions or talking about this in the Labour Party have absolutely no class analysis. They have no mention of trade unions, or they haven't even spoken to people who are, in these situations. So that is what really annoys me, rather than actually the idea of free movement itself, which is another question.
The next question is pretty out there, but I think sometimes out there questions prompt interesting answers. So from Patrick Holt, how much should we worry about a US-backed coup against a Corbyn government? With the with the follow-up, even under Bernie, even if he wins. Are the USA going to overthrow Corbyn?
There's going to be international pressure, and that's why I think actually it comes back to where we started this evening about mandatory reselection. We need a strong socialist parliament to fight back against the international capital, which is going to come down on us probably like a ton of bricks. And I think actually that's going to be more of the conversation we're going to be having around before the next general election. If we're looking like we're going to win, we need to talk about actually what we do when we get power. It's going to start when we win a general election. I don't know about a specifically US-backed coup, but it's institutions that don't go by names of countries what we should be more worried about. Corporations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point. There's interesting debates about how much opposition there would be to Corbyn's programme. So I think in terms of economic policy, the powers that be on a global level would be perfectly happy to accept a reversal of austerity.
Yeah, we're not that radical
yet. I mean, in terms of economic policy, in terms of currently our manifesto, I don't think many people would be trying to bring us down. But I do think the point you make about the fact that if the shit hits the fan, when it might do, if pressure bears down on us in a similar way that it did in Greece, what you're going to need is you're going to need some real cadre in the PLP. You're going to need some people who are able to take that pressure and stick to the line. And that is the opposite of what we have right now. So one thing I find somewhat frustrating is when people talk about the PLP as it currently exists, and they say there's only about 20 people who are complete wreckers who want to undermine Corbyn and McDonnell in any situation, which is true. Yeah. But I think the fact that there's about 90 of them who will go, or 172, that's how many people voted in that vote of no confidence, right? Who the moment shit gets tough, they'll go with whatever is the easiest option. If you're about to take power as a socialist government, who might be under pressure from many different sides, internationally and domestically. What you want is solid people on those parliamentary benches who are able to withstand that pressure because they understand they're part of a broader project. Not people who will go along with the Corbyn project so long as it seems popular and easy, because it's not going to be easy.
Can I say this is a really good point here? If Venezuela is anything to go by, there'll be rich people devaluing the currency by black market trading, buying euros and dollars with sterling at under market rate. Precisely. This is there will be a huge tank in.
That was only possible because they had capital controls. You can only do black market trading.
Not black market. There'll be lots of. But the point is, people will be trading pounds, moving into basic point is that
capital flight.
There'll be a massive devaluation of pound sterling because people will be moving out of pound at a record pace into other currencies.
So Zara, you get a run on the bank, or run on the currency, a run on the pound.
But yeah, we had that at Brexit. The pound was already quite weak. I mean, I was talking about this to my partner. It wasn't that long ago, about 10 years ago. How old were you 10 years ago?
11.
You didn't know Danny Alexander. We're getting old. I said this to James on the show. We're getting old. It's really sad. 10 years ago, it was €2 to the pound almost.
Blimey.
Yeah.
What is it now?
It's about 1 to 1, right? It's not impossible that at the low point of a big political cataclysm in this country, I won't say what because that's what then quoted, you could move to say £2 to the euro. That's possible. And that changes a lot. When you're importing stuff, that changes a lot. So it basically means people can't afford to go on holiday anymore. Right?
Well, that will be a boon to the domestic tourism.
No, I'm being serious. My dad's a taxi driver in Bournemouth. It's fantastic for him.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, right? So it's not in all negative. There'll be some sectors which benefit. For instance, I did a little experiment. If you go to your local Waitrose, no, I don't shop at fucking Waitrose. You go to your local Waitrose and look at the dairy products. Very few of them are now coming from outside Britain. So, for instance, you always used to be able to get Kerrygold butter, Irish butter, at Waitrose. It's kind of disappeared. A lot more own brand dairy products.
Buy shares in British cows.
Which, yeah, well, dairy is
in Britain.
Classic example.
Milk it in Britain.
Milk it in Britain. Classic example. We have lots of dairy farms in this country. All of a sudden, it'd be profitable to go back into dairy farming because you can't import this stuff anymore. So, swings and roundabouts. But I think pound sterling will massively devalue, and that doesn't you don't require a coup to remove a government, right?
This is a good follow-up question from Owen Dowling. Will Gina Miller launch a Pinochet-style coup backed by the CIA?
That's a lot more plausible.
Similar rhetoric, to be honest, isn't it? Right. We import half of our cheese, says
We
George
also
Macbeth.
export cheese.
Do we?
Which is weird, yeah.
We import
Cheesy autarky coming up.
Cheesy. Hey, why not? What's wrong with British cheese? It's good.
Views. This is from Kai Kiswani. Both of your views on the events at the TUC Congress held up in Manchester. Anything of note? I know you were interested in what the Archbishop had to say.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say, if you haven't watched the whole speech, definitely go watch it. It's about 30 minutes long, but it's worth it. Justin Welby came out and sort of supported trade unions in a way I thought was really nice, because he was essentially saying, I'm not partisan, I'm not supporting the Labour Party, but here's why trade unions are an important part of society, which I thought was actually really powerful, because trade unions are always labelled as far left, hard left, but actually they are an important part of the society. And he wanted to say, he said he wanted to put church-run food banks out of business, which I thought was a good quote, because actually the church is doing a lot in this country to support the poor, and just saying that like Christian values are supporting poverty, supporting justice, and against poverty. And I mean, it's more in America, but it does happen here. You have like evangelical Christians who claim their Christianity is somehow akin with their right-wing political views, which I think is outrageous, really. And not how I read the Bible at all. Like, I completely see it from a left-wing perspective. So that was really nice. And then you had all the Brexit stuff. And
what got voted on in Brexit? So there's a new TUC policy with regard to Brexit.
Yeah, I haven't read the motion. It's not like full people's vote, but I agree with, and I like the way that trade unions approach Brexit, is essentially like they care about the issues that Brexit will affect as an umbrella issue.
They care about their members and their members' jobs and their workers' rights. Yeah.
And I think they talked a lot about how Brexit is going to affect things like the NHS and and stuff like that, which I think is really important. Yeah.
I like this. I mean, red Leicester. That's great. That can now become the quintessential socialist cheese.
I love red Leicester.
Red
I don't
Leicester.
really like red
It's so
Leicester.
I don't like it.
Yeah, I prefer.
It's so
I
good.
prefer continental cheeses, to be honest.
What cheese do you like?
Halloumi, feta,
But you can make it all here.
and I quite like crumbly cheese,
But that's
which
a
I think is.
But Michael, that's a process. It's
I
not
think
like
that's
grapes.
English. Wensleydale.
We can't have Wensleydale's English. Okay, we can't have like
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
very
No, but like,
English.
Buy shares in Wensleydale.
wines is difficult, right? We haven't got the climate to grow great grapes.
We can make beer, can't we?
Yeah,
Yeah, we do.
cherries.
Lots of beers from
cherry
England.
wine. We produce great cherries in this country.
What's it called? Cherry B.
wine.
We'll just have a diet of
Slow gin.
Cherry B, Red Leicester, and
Mead, honey wine, delicious.
no, I think we've got a bees I wouldn't put shares in bees because they're having their own problems at the moment, aren't they?
Basically, look, if Iceland can produce bananas
Can
domestically,
they?
yeah,
Fuck.
then we can do stuff. There's somebody who was talking about hydroponics, and they were like, this is where it gets clipped and goes on Guido. Do you know the biggest hydroponics agriculture in history where it was? You will not believe this.
Chile under Allende.
No, complete opposite, in fact.
Ooh. Nazi Germany.
It was the United States in the
Oh.
Pacific during the Second World War.
Oh, what, on Pacific Islands?
Yeah, because they were trying to produce enough food for like these like, because obviously this is when you had long range bombers and they had to use these islands as like airfields, and they were growing like lettuce and all this stuff in these giant hydroponic, like, you can Google this, it's all there. And it's like people have done this, and some of the output was like prodigious. And necessity is the mother of invention. So that's the sort of stuff we would not have to do, but we would need to do. There would be things like, there are some crops you can't grow in this country, right? You would want to grow fruit, coffee, tea. Okay, maybe you might need an artificial climate to do it. Okay, fine, great. Turn the fucking shard
Cuba make
into a...
coffee, right?
Who makes
Does
coffee?
Cuba make coffee?
Cuba. Yeah, we'll get
just
our
import
coffee
it
from
all
Cuba. That'll be our one trading partner
Done.
in the world.
And sure.
And Venezuela. Hey, great coffee.
Venezuela. Well, I don't know how much they're exporting at the moment, but they do need currency, so we can probably strike a good deal. No, serious things are going down there, but I mean, there's potential in terms of
Where else does
Produce.
coffee?
Colombia. Well, coffee comes from Kenya, Ethiopia.
Vietnam.
Does it? Vietnam?
Very
South
bad coffee,
America?
yeah.
Very bad
Colombian
coffee.
coffee.
Robusta coffee comes from Vietnam.
Yeah, but I think our palates will change by necessity as well.
What do
So
you
if we only have Vietnamese coffee, we'll start to get a taste for Vietnamese coffee.
No, but it's shit coffee. It's not Arabica.
Yeah, but we'll forget about the taste of Arabica. give it 5 years. Can
Can I just say one other thing is also like the right on the freedom of movement stuff. They're like, oh, we want to move away from the EU and back towards the colonies, and have Jamaicans and Nigerians come here. I agree. I actually agree with this point because we fucked these countries up. Their ancestors we ripped out of Guinea and at the heart of Africa, and we moved them to these godforsaken islands which have hurricanes every 10 minutes. They're great places. Sorry, but they do, and they're very. These are very tough places to live in. The hurricane season in the West Indies is horrific. And so all of that stuff, we should be paying reparations to these people to build the sort of resilience so they can deal with that stuff. And we should be trading with them. And we should be giving them freedom of movement because we fucked them up so much as a form of reparations to our colonial territories of yesteryear. That's one thing to think about. And Jamaica does great coffee. That's why it came to mind. Blue Mountain Coffee, best coffee in the world.
But the right use those arguments disingenuously, don't they? Because these are sort of Tories who say this, but then they've also backed up all of the policies around hostile environment, around Windrush. So it's about agreeing with that policy, but coming from a completely different point of view. And this is where we get into trouble because a lot of people go, okay, so if you're anti-free movement as a left-wing activist, then you're racist. And that's not fair. But also then you look at the Tories making these arguments and they are racist. So it's like you do have to have quite a nuanced debate about it.
I think that's kind of stupid because people go, oh, well, you like this. Well, this person says that too. So that must mean you're a fascist. It's like, well, Marine Le Pen favours nationalisation. Does that mean I have to become like that now? Now the left-wing position is privatisation.
That's
No.
thrown out both sides, though, to be fair. So, like, the left Remain people always get told you're on the side of the establishment and big business. So, I mean...
Well, they are.
Yeah, but I mean, you're on the side of...
No, but they're literally sharing...
racists and people who...
No, they
Yeah,
literally
but
are.
they're
They're based in the same
sharing
fucking buildings as
platforms.
these
Yeah.
people.
That's,
well, it depends which
yeah.
organisation you're talking about, doesn't it?
Well, like, off fuck on that lot.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not a catchy name, by the way.
Fuck. Oh, fuck off. All right, it's getting late, isn't it?
Let's answer a few more questions. I thought it was some
You
good
want more questions?
One or two.
All right, 1 or 2 more questions. So keep them. Prioritize really important ones. I don't even understand this reference. Judge Holden, who is up for being a Tory every Tuesday? I don't get it. Please expand. Please explain.
You can use LEDs to grow plants now. This is in my new book.
What's the? You can.
You can, and also the changes in price performance for LEDs. It's falling in cost so quickly that actually urban farming at scale is going to become very affordable in about 5-10 years. Very affordable. Its fall in cost is like with computing.
Can you power the LEDs with renewable energy?
Well, the thing is,
LEDs are very low energy, aren't they?
power,
That's the point.
Yeah.
They're very low. They're low energy.
Low energy.
They're very,
but in the good way.
Yes, they're hugely energy efficient. So obviously, with a traditional incandescent bulb, most of the energy was emitted as heat, right? And with an LED, basically no energy is emitted bar light. And the point is, you're looking at me strangely, but the point is they're becoming so efficient that
the thought I just
very,
had
very
was
cheap.
because when people grew cannabis, in their lofts, the way they'd get caught is that they'd have that helicopter with the heat sensors.
That's right.
So does LED means that you can do that without fear of reprisal because they're not that hot?
They emit far less heat energy, but probably if you're doing it at scale, probably still a significant amount, right?
Yeah.
So you can grow a few plants.
Because these are LEDs and we're feeling hot.
Yeah, that's true.
But they're not that hot. If these were
bright
incandescent
though, aren't
bulbs.
they?
Yeah, I think a helicopter could pick it up if we had enough to grow. Anyway, if anyone knows from experience whether growing weed with LEDs means that you're not subject to
Arrest.
well, you're subject
It's
to
called
arrest.
Hate's law. Hate's law is exactly what it is, yes. Anyway,
Thoughts on the new Tribune mag? We're all very positive, I think, aren't we?
we're very positive.
Amazing. I'm really excited for it to launch.
We'll be at the launch at TWT if you want to bump into any of us.
Everyone
Unless it's on at 8 p.m,
snap up.
in which case I won't be there. I think it probably is on at 8 p.m.
I think
So maybe I'll go for drinks
it's on the
afterwards.
TWT website when the launch is, but everyone should snap up their subscriptions and.
All right, we're not going to be able to
Alright.
answer this, but it's worth a shout out. Can anyone who's watching this show tonight give Velociraptor a lift from Southampton to TWT? It's quite a long journey, that.
Jenny Formby lives in Southampton.
Does she? Maybe
Get a
Jenny Formby can give you a lift.
She's definitely going.
How can we push Labour to have better policies with reference to police and prison abolition?
This has to be the last one because that's a huge question.
Yeah, go on. You were the one who wanted more questions.
No, but that's actually like a proper question. I thought it was about like your haircut and shit.
Oh,
What was it? Police and prison reform.
yeah. What do you think?
I think it needs to be a wider discussion actually about how we implement policy as the Labour Party. So the National Policy Forum hasn't been that effective, and is it conference? The leadership needs to make decisions and interim, blah, blah, blah. But just on my opinion, I think we do need to be stronger on it because...
What do you mean by stronger?
Well, I don't think we have enough policy on it in the sense that, like, we don't have detailed policy on prison reform. I think that's a consistent apathy around the subject because people who are prisoners can't vote. Therefore, it's the same with young people, isn't it? Young people don't really vote as much, so we don't have to mention them in our policy as much. You're not going to have active prisoners as members of your local Labour Party. So I think it's our duty to stand up for them in terms of rehabilitation and
Having a more humane policy.
yeah.
basically.
I mean, we might have policy on it, but the fact that I don't know it in detail means that it's not been
no one
advertised
thinks you're going to win an
enough.
election on prison, basically, which is why it's kind of done quietly.
Yeah, maybe.
What do you think, Aaron?
Well, prisons and policing are two separate things. I think you get far more consensus on the left around prison reform than you would around policing. Prison seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Stop privatisation, stop outsourcing, move towards a system, because it's completely self-defeating on every measure. Move to a system with lower recidivism that saves money, fewer people returning. Recidivism is people returning to prison after they commit a crime. And we know from every data point, every major study out there, that a rehabilitative approach means lower rates of recidivism than a harsh authoritarian approach. So in regards to prisons, we could reduce the prison population dramatically over a couple of decades. Dramatically. In terms of policing, I think in the short term, you'd have to spend more money on policing simply by virtue of outsourcing, their pensions being fucked over for so long, And of course, if you say that there are bits of the radical left where if you say that actually we probably should give the police more money, they'll be like, oh my God, well, do you support outsourcing? Do you support low pensions? These people have these jobs. And then the conversation about reforming of police has to be a bit more longue durée. Yeah, it's not about what we do next year, it's about the next 5-10 years. And I think you're absolutely right. There's not enough stuff being done about this on the left right now. Prisons you can do very quickly and very effectively, though.
Yeah. Having said that, I don't know about our prison policy. That's actually a lie, because Richard Bergen's been doing some good stuff about the privatisation of prisons, which I've seen a bit on Twitter. So that's good. But I think it needs to be a conversation we have more regularly at like CLPs and stuff. In terms of police, yeah, I completely agree. I've been at like protests and parties where like there's been police, and then actually you can like talk to them about like their jobs, their pensions, the public sector and stuff like that, and they're very much on board. I think obviously there's controversy around the police, especially where it's to an extreme in America, especially against, you know, violence against people of colour. And these are conversations we need to have, but then we also need to have, like you say, conversations about their rights and their pensions. And
I think there's a lot of easy wins here, right? So if you look at, I was going to talk about Sadiq Khan a bit more, but we sort of ran out of time. But I mean, he's getting a lot of beef for being or not having dealt with the crime wave in London. I mean, we can have a debate about how real the crime wave is, but definitely there are more young people dying from violent crime than there have been in previous years. And he has been perceived, and I think fairly, to be honest, as a bit slow to respond to that. And I think he could have very easily, actually, with his platform, made a huge public campaign and been on the TV every weekend talking about how the fact that the Tories cut all our youth services means that people will, understandably, turn towards crime. And I think he could have been out speaking to parents, speaking to young people in youth centres or people who've had their youth centres cut. And I think he could have really pushed that to the top of the national agenda, and he hasn't. And I think that's a real failure on his part. And I think we can have really actually a policy that pleases everyone, which is to say you have to fully fund police. Because, yeah, we don't necessarily want to give our police more powers, but we don't want them to be having to decide whether or not to investigate crime based on money. We want them to decide whether or not to investigate crime based on whether that's the right thing to do. So I think we should be fully funding our police, but we should also be making a massive deal about the fact that crime increases not really because you cut police, but because you don't give people other opportunities in life. And I think he's been weak on that. And I think, to be honest, Labour probably have in general.
There was also an opportunity to have a really nuanced debate around the economy. So people go, oh, we need to get these young people into work so they don't get involved in gang crime and drug. London has a very low rate of unemployment. It has one of the highest rates of employment in the country. And yet violent crime is higher here. Now, why is that? Okay, so it can't just be about a job. It's about life here is very expensive. In-work poverty here is very high. Public service is incredibly expensive. Housing is almost impossible to access for a working class person. So you could use this almost as a prism to critique the contemporary economy whilst also diminishing this Tory achievement of high employment. And again, like you said, it's just been completely missed, which is a tragedy because it's very easy for people to understand. Why is violent crime so high amongst young people in London? Because of the failings of the modern economy, specifically since 2010.
All right.
Speaking to people from outer boroughs in London, I think they've been saying that voters have been turning against Sadiq Khan on this specific issue and risks Labour councillors getting elected in some places because they see him on the same platform. And I think that is partly because, as you say, Sadiq hasn't, done this campaign, or not just Sadiq, but local councillors across London, Labour councillors, haven't campaigned enough on the fact that they're being... their budgets are all being cut and things like that, and austerity coming from central government. And I think that needs to completely change. There needs to be a massive campaign on that specifically all year round, not just election time. It can't just be something you talk about in your election leaflets. It needs to be a grassroots campaign.
It's actually there's a real open door to completely change the narrative, not just on crime and policing, but on race in Britain.
Absolutely.
The idea that sort of what the right-wing press are trying to do is sort of say there's no-go zones and that this is all sort of like a racial problem.
Yeah.
And it's, if you had, Sadiq Khan has a massive platform. If you have loads of videos of him, like having really heartfelt, deep conversations with young people who don't have any opportunities because services have been cut by the Tories. One, that completely changes the narrative on austerity. Two, it completely changes the narrative on race in Britain. And I don't know why that's not happening.
Capitalism.
Yeah,
More
exactly.
youth centres. No, life for most young working class people in London is shit. It is shit. It's not going to be solved by some youth centres. It's going to be solved by affordable housing, a mass programme of social housing, proper living wage, giving people a sense of hope and optimism for the future. Which in London, how the hell, if you're a working class kid in London, how the hell are you optimistic about the future? You know, if you are, credit to you, because it's not easy. So, you know, like you said, I mean, it's such an opportunity. It's an open goal. And I don't say we, Sadiq Khan in particular is not taking it. And that's not to criticise him. I think he's failed in that regard. But I think pretty much any other Labour politician who was that, you know, from the PLP or whatever, probably would have done the same thing. I don't think they realise perhaps the extent. Take David Lammy. David Lammy would be great on a range of things. But this particular role, people say, well, what does the London Mayor do? He could really draw attention
He has
to.
a massive platform.
He has a platform. He should be.
He's a
He should
figurehead.
be a figurehead for progressive change in Britain and for sort of like bringing to light exactly this kind of issue. So it's not too late. He's just been reselected. He will be our candidate for the next mayoral elections. We will be campaigning for him.
Of course.
Yes.
But yeah, let's raise the game a little bit. Shall we end there?
We should.
I think we should. Lara, anything else you need to say? Any
No.
more information that needs to burst?
No, just stay
before
tuned
we
tomorrow
finish there.
for NEC decisions and see everyone at conference.
Exactly. Yeah. So there'll be the big NEC meeting tomorrow. I'm sure all three of us will be tweeting about it.
I can't because you're not allowed your phone.
But when it's over, right? What time does it
Yeah.
end? Does it go on all day,
Midnight.
like 24 hours or something? Oh my god.
A long time.
Well, thanks for being there for us. You know, actually, you're not our rep. We're too old. But if you're under 27, then Lara is representing you. We will see you every night at TWT. We'll see you every night doing a Tisky Sour at TWT.
And the Labour
At
Party will be
8
at Tisky Sour
PM.
next week.
The Labour
It's all
Party will
around.
be there Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday at 8 p.m. We'll have some very good guests. We'll have some very good conversations. We'll be streaming, I
Every
think,
day.
some conference.
Every day.
No, I said every day.
Every day. No, but it's just
Saturday
remarkable,
to-
right? I just have to remind myself, wow.
Oh, okay, yeah. This is the future. We one day we will be an every night organisation. But
A
for
TV,
now,
a TV channel, essentially.
24 hours.
And also, James Butler will be doing Novara FM podcast every day. Great.
Sick.
Which is great. There's a lot of stuff to do. We've never done it to this extent before. Go to support.novaramedia.com. Help us build a new media for different politics. You know what to do. And we wouldn't have got to this level without our supporters. It's fantastic. Helping Lara share her outstanding politics to the world.
Fantastic helping Lara. What do you
No, we're giving Lara has a platform to talk about the great stuff that's going on at
Yeah.
the BBC right now. No, it's true.
Oh, yeah,
This is the stuff that the BBC should be talking about ad infinitum. They often don't. You know, they think Chris Leslie's more interesting. Are you
That is
kidding?
true.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it'd be nice to have you guys talking about the actual issues because a lot of people who have contacted me or Young Labour for media requests just want to talk about factionism, but they don't actually want to talk about. They want to talk about momentum, but they want to talk about momentum thugs. They don't want to talk about why they're supporting policies, you know. Like, and I'm just like, I want to talk about Young Labour, Democracy Review, Young Activists. Look at this. So it's a bit frustrating. So it's good to have.
You should be
guys.
like, yeah. I mean,
Sick.
Why are you?
Do you want a nightly show, Lara? Yeah. Not nightly, weekly.
weekly?
You have to choose the day of the
Nightly.
week.
You can't be a doctor if it's nightly.
Yeah. We didn't even mention that. You know, Lara tomorrow has to be in potentially a 24-hour NEC meeting. You are
24 hour, hopefully not, please.
You are. It gets pretty wild in there. John Lansman with the ketamine.
Okay, we need to cut this now, Michael. What the fuck? What the fuck are you doing?
No.
John Lansman has never taken anything remotely like that. He's a very sedate, serene character.
It's a
Michael-
lot better it's a lot better being in hospital than the NEC.
Really?
Yeah, I get to
Better
hang out with little
organised.
babies.
Yeah. All right. This was Tisky Sour. We are Novara Media. Please go to support.novaramedia.com so that we can keep doing what we're doing and expanding. I was joined by Lara McNeill. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Aaron Bastani.
My pleasure, as always.
Always a pleasure.
Mm.
See you on Saturday. Ciao.